Gaza's hospitals have been decimated. Most no longer function following airstrikes, repeated siege, and occupation by Israeli forces. But in those that continue to operate, a new kind of ward has appeared. This is a new ward at the Nasser Hospital in Khan Yunis, where infants and small children undergo treatment for acute starvation. Now, the very young and the very old are usually among the first to succumb to the kind of famine conditions that Israel is imposing on the enclave. And small children, unable to express their intense hunger verbally, quickly stop eating altogether. They grow lethargic, their skin dries, and their hair becomes brittle. Next, there are seizures, coma, and finally, death. You couldn't hear it in the footage we played, but that ward filled with hungry and stressed mothers caring for their starving babies was almost completely silent. The loudest sound was the whirring of a fan. Since the beginning of July, 16 children have died from hunger, 81 have starved to death since the beginning of Israel's genocide 21 months ago. That is an alarming acceleration. But it isn't only children who are fading away. This graphic from The Guardian shows the rate at which starvation is increasing in Gaza. In the last 4 days, there have been 45 starvation deaths, and across the previous 652 days of Israel's genocide, there had been just 68 hunger-related deaths. In other parts of Gaza, starving Palestinians have almost no access to healthcare. At the Al-Shifa hospital in Gaza City, a makeshift ward has been put together to try to treat the symptoms of severe malnutrition suffered by Palestinians of all ages. Al-Shifa is only operating at 25% capacity after being left in ruins by the IDF last year. But still, relatives and medical staff attempt to provide care and comfort for the victims of a famine that is rapidly spreading across the enclave. Now, these images that we are showing you are of Palestinians at the very end stages of starvation. But 1 in 3 Palestinians are now chronically hungry, according to the United Nations, and going multiple days without eating. Among them are the medical staff treating the starving. At Nasser Hospital, one of them told the New York Times this. The team is exhausted from hunger. Yesterday, some staff members ate just 10 spoons of plain white rice. One of the most insidious effects of starvation is that when someone has been hungry for long enough, they're no longer able to absorb nutrients when they are able to finally get food. But getting food is getting harder and harder in Gaza. These scenes were filmed at a soup kitchen in Gaza City. The UN's Philippe Lazzarini posted his own description of Gaza, saying this: "People in Gaza are neither dead nor alive. They are walking corpses," a colleague in Gaza told me this morning. Meanwhile, according to UNRWA's latest findings, 1 in every 5 children is malnourished in Gaza City as cases increase every day. When child malnutrition surges, coping mechanisms fail, access to food and care disappears, and famine silently begins to unfold. Most children our teams are seeing are emaciated, weak, and at high risk of dying if they don't get the treatment they urgently need. Earlier today, I was joined by Alex de Waal. He is the Executive Director of the World Peace Foundation at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University. He's also the author of several books on famine, including Mass Starvation, The History and Future of Famine. I began by asking him why we're seeing a sudden acceleration in the rate of death by starvation in Gaza now.
One of the features of acute food insecurity and famine is that there is a sort of threshold that is reached, a place at which people who have been trying for weeks, months or years to keep their families together, to feed themselves, to sustain themselves, to have a sense of dignity in how they are able to survive. there comes a breaking point. And when that breaking affects a very large part of a society, there's a sort of change in state. And a functioning society becomes a starving society. Starvation isn't just that individual phenomenon of people, a person lacking nutrition, lacking food, wasting away. It's also a social phenomenon of the collective humiliation, loss of dignity, loss of everything that makes life meaningful. People who have undergone the worst famines describe how it is dehumanizing. It's like becoming an animal. And when you begin to see not just a handful of people, but a significant proportion of a community reduced to scavenging, to stealing, to having that stampede for food, that's when you recognize that this is happening. It doesn't require a statistician or a specialist to diagnose this. We can see it. And that we're at that point, it seems, in Gaza. And when that happens, it's not that the level of malnutrition and numbers of children dying just continues to increase. It increases exponentially. And the society gets sucked into a sort of vortex whereby the basic resilience that keeps a community functioning, that keeps families together, has been torn apart. And what I really fear is that we are at that point in Gaza now. Everything that I see and hear indicates that, yes, perhaps we are there, and it's the most horrible thing to witness.
Yeah, I mean, I want to ask about kind of the mechanics of what you describe. I mean, Israel had put Gaza under total siege for 2 months, from March to May, and then you have a small amount of aid distributed by kind of this rogue US organization, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. But then we see, as you say, this severe deprivation, and we see what looks like an exponential increase in deaths. Now, I mean, how long has this been in the making? At what point did this tide start to turn for it to reach that threshold that you mentioned? Is it something that was kind of bound to happen, or is this something that is the result of decisions that were made in recent months?
So ever since this latest war began in October of 2023, the situation in Gaza has been moving between the calamitous and the catastrophic. So, and what we saw repeatedly over that first year was that when the metrics, the humanitarian metrics, reached a sort of flashing red level, whereby the UN's humanitarian data system is called the Integrated Food Security Phase Classification System. When they said famine might be about to happen, or when the United States' own famine early warning system also flashed red, the Biden administration would put pressure on Israel to allow more aid in. And then we had, in January to March, we had a ceasefire and we had more aid coming. But every time the population in Gaza pushed up against those thresholds, those limits, its own capacity, its own resilience was reduced. And then we had, as you said, from March to May, a complete siege, a complete blockade, and then a new round of forced displacement and destruction. Then there was a sort of a fork in the path. So there were two options for Israel and its backers. One was to let the United Nations back in for a full spectrum of humanitarian relief, which would have done three things. It would have hopefully provided just enough calories to feed everybody. It would have provided some specialist aid for those malnourished children who are at death's door. You can't just feed a malnourished child pasta. You can't even give them baby formula. You need to give them special therapeutic food. And otherwise, they can't digest it. They also need, you need to give clean water, provide sanitation, provide cooking fuel, the essentials of life. But you also need to do this in a way that supports the basic structures of society, the families, the communities. You need to bring aid to where people are and give it through trusted mechanisms. And one of the reasons for that is if you don't do that, it will fall into the hands of armed men. We all know that in a situation of war or siege, it's the men with guns who are the last ones to starve. So that you would need close monitoring, good, effective guarding of relief convoys. None of this is perfect, but the UN has the procedures, protocols to minimize that. So turn to the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, so-called. What's its model? It has 4, instead of 400 sites, which is what the UN and the voluntary agencies had, has just 4 sites, 3 of them far in the south. The rations that it provides are dry rations and very limited. And the amount is simply not enough. It's probably maximum 1/2 of what is needed to prevent mass starvation. It doesn't provide that essential assistance that is needed for those malnourished children. It doesn't provide water, sanitation, fuel. But also the other thing that it doesn't do is it doesn't support the communities. In fact, it appears to be designed to do the opposite, to undermine them. So if you are living in Gaza and you want to get assistance, you want to get some of those rations that are available. Those ration stations are only available for a short period every day, and they only advertise the time when they will open, perhaps a few minutes beforehand. So you have to go and camp out in the rubble, in these militarized free fire zones, in order to be on hand for that Facebook announcement. Yes, such and such a ration station will open in 45 minutes, and it will be open for 60 minutes. And you will rush there, and you will rush down a road next to a military unit. And the soldiers there have only one way of communicating with you, which is firing their guns, using live ammunition. They don't have any means of crowd control. And so regardless of what orders they're under, maybe they are told to shoot to kill, maybe they're told try not to kill, but you use your weapons to make sure the crowd doesn't come too near the military post. People are going to get killed.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard, or at least seen people saying that, aid workers saying that people in Gaza are saying, I would rather die by airstrike or have my family die by airstrike than have to watch my family die of starvation, which I think really speaks to the trauma that you're speaking about. I mean, Israel is saying, we've talked a little bit about this, that Israel, the US, say they're providing some aid, and that humanitarian organizations are refusing to work with them to distribute more aid. What do you make of that? And what do you make of the ways in which Israel is kind of weaponizing this question of aid in order to kind of not sanitize their image, but basically use it as a get out of jail free card when it comes to whether or not they are conducting a genocide? They often say, if we wanted to conduct a genocide, we wouldn't be trying to provide aid. What do you make of this kind of weaponization of aid in this kind of context?
So all those who perpetrate famine try and conceal what they're doing. There are many strategies of denial that they use. And there's a very simple strategy of denial, which is you just don't allow anyone to go in and report it. And of course, they've not allowed any foreign journalists in. All the reports are from Palestinian journalists, and they are very, very harrowing. But we have become accustomed in Europe and the United States to having European and American journalists as authority figures reporting. And we haven't had that. And then there's the subtle obfuscation of trying to explain away the figures, trying to say that what you are seeing is not what you think you are, is not how it really is. And there's statistical denialism too. There's the manipulation of statistics to say, or the suppression of statistics to say it's actually different. It's not, you're just seeing a few extreme cases. The wider phenomenon is different. And I think that the informational campaign has been very pervasive, particularly in Israel, and has fed a deep denialism. And I understand why people don't want to confront this, why they want to deny it, why they want to blame Hamas. And there are many things to blame Hamas for. Hamas is guilty of many crimes. It's guilty of all sorts of political recklessness. It is not responsible for this mass starvation that is at Israel's door. But the key point about the modalities of aid is this, which is that starvation is a weapon, but rations can also be a weapon. And the way that the rationing is being organized is weaponized. Now, yes, if Israel wanted to kill everyone in Gaza, it could do so, and it has decided not to do so. But genocide is not the killing of everybody. The threshold for genocide is different. Genocide is the destruction of a group as such, and that can be accomplished without killing everybody. It can become accomplished while keeping people alive. And indeed, in not every concentration camp is a death camp. The British used concentration camps in South Africa and in Malaya, and they kept people alive, or most of the people alive. But it was still a crime. It doesn't prevent it from being criminal. Just because it does not have the same annihilatory intent or outcome as in the Holocaust, doesn't mean that it cannot be genocide. And my final point on this is that the Convention on Genocide is a convention to prevent genocide. We shouldn't have to wait until you can prove that it has happened to say that the obligation to stop it should be enacted. And that is important in this case because last year at the International Court of Justice, there was a provisional order, an instruction handed down to Israel by the court unanimously. Even the Israeli judge on the court voted for it. And I'll quote it for you. It is that Israel should take all necessary and effective measures to ensure, without delay and full cooperation with the United Nations, the unhindered provision at scale by all concerned of urgently needed basic services and humanitarian assistance, including food, water, electricity, fuel, shelter, clothing, hygiene and sanitation requirements, as well as medical supplies and medical care, etc., etc. That is a legal order. And it's an order, it's an instruction and obligation that falls on Israel to prevent a genocidal outcome, the destruction of the Palestinians as a group. It is an obligation that falls upon other governments, including the United Kingdom government. When the British government says, we can't say if this is genocide or not because the court has not ruled. The court has ruled that there is a risk of a genocidal outcome and action has to be taken to stop that. And that is the question that Prime Minister Keir Starmer has to answer. And he's a lawyer, he knows this.
You outline there really effectively how mass starvation is used as a genocidal weapon, not just in the kind of the brute force of starvation as which literally claims lives, but in the breaking down of a society that, for a long time people in Gaza have said, the kind of the community solidarity is kind of all they've had, and this is taking aim at that. And I kind of, on that thread, I mean, you write a lot about how hunger and food deprivation is not just about people barely clinging onto life. It's not just about the kind of the physical damage, but what is the damage of the psychological damage for a person or for 2 million people, when they are deprived of food for a long period of time?
So we know that the biological impacts of hunger, starvation are lifelong. We know from studies of, let's say, the Dutch hunger winter of 1944-45, the young children who suffered malnutrition during that famine, they were shorter than their siblings. They didn't do so well in school, and they passed those deficits on to their own children. So they're the biological impacts. But the social trauma is something perhaps more profound and less easy to measure. So that the memory people have of these incidents are primarily the memories of dehumanization, of shame, the deep, deep shame, the humiliation of scavenging for food, of inflicting little acts of cruelty, turning away starving children from your door, hiding food, not participating in any, of the most basic social activities. If you have, food, if you have money to treat one child who's sick and not another, and you choose one and not the other, of selling your most precious possessions, your grandmother's jewelry, your piece of land. And it's these traumas, these humiliations, these cruelties that live on in society. So that in the case of Ireland, after the great hunger of the 1840s, there was a great silence, among the Irish people about the depths of humiliation that they had suffered. And it was only in the 1990s, 150 years almost later, that the Irish were able publicly to commemorate the suffering that they had endured. And there may be other cases where it has taken less time, but it is usually a generation or more before a society can really confront the horrors of mass starvation. So I fear that the crime that is being inflicted upon the Palestinians of Gaza today, that wound will take a generation or more to heal.
Yeah, and I mean that question of the purpose of the ICJ, the purpose of the Genocide Convention is prevention. It isn't to wait until a genocide finishes and then to litigate on it. It's to prevent it. So why has it failed so spectacularly in doing so? Is that an inherent flaw in our systems of genocide prevention, or is it something else?
If governments don't want to follow their obligations under the law, then the law cannot be enforced.
An expert in the use of starvation as a weapon of genocide, as a weapon of political conflict. This is not the first time that mass starvation has been used as a weapon of colonial occupation. We know the Bengal famine, Ireland, as you mentioned. How have societies that have endured this recovered? Have they recovered? What does the next 50, 100 years look like based on what you know about the impact that this has on a society?
So the impacts can be profound and long-lasting. But I want to turn that issue around, actually, because I think we talk about justice, we talk about accountability, and certainly, there can be, accountability in the courts, but there can be other forms of accountability too. There can be apologies, there can be compensation, restitution, truth-telling, giving all the assistance of all forms to acknowledge the gravity of what has happened, to allow people to confront their suffering with dignity and with a sense that the world has recognized the wrongs that have been inflicted upon them, the harms they have suffered. And I think one of the things that we need to think about now is the moral repair that will be needed to support the Palestinian people of Gaza in order for them to recover from this in the aftermath of this trauma and this crime.
This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org. I'm Amy Goodman. Hospitals in the Gaza Strip are reporting 7 new deaths due to famine and malnutrition as Israel continues its starvation campaign against the Palestinian territory. Gaza's hunger-related death toll is now at 154, with at least 89 children among the dead. We're joined now by Arwa Damon, award-winning journalist, formerly with CNN, now founder of Inara, a nonprofit currently providing medical and mental health care to children in Gaza. Her new piece for the Atlantic Council is headlined, "Inside the Israeli Government's Starvation of Gaza from an aid group trying to deliver food." She previously spent 18 years at CNN, including as senior international correspondent, joining us from Urla, Turkey. Thanks so much for joining us again, Arwa. Describe what is happening right now in Gaza.
You know, it continues to be indescribable, to be frank. We do have these airdrops that are taking place. We do have what is being described as a trickle of trucks going in, but nothing is happening to actually genuinely stave off the starvation that we're seeing across the Gaza Strip. These airdrops, what we saw of them, for example, in the first 48 hours since Israel allowed them to begin, barely amount to a couple of trucks. What is managing to get into Gaza that is being collected by humanitarian organizations quite often does not make it to the warehouse because organizations are either having to confront armed gangs, and I'll note here that these armed gangs operate in what's known as the red zone, which means that these are areas that are fully under Israeli control, and yet somehow these armed gangs continue to have the capacity to operate there, or the trucks are quite simply swarmed by masses of starving and desperate Gazans. The situation is beyond atrocious. Look, my organization, Inara, managed to recently get its hands on some fresh vegetables. And this isn't produce that came in from the outside. This is locally grown produce in the few greenhouses that are still accessible. And each parcel that we distributed was roughly 13 pounds. So 13 pounds of fresh vegetable cost $120. And I was watching the video sent over by the team, and you would have thought that the children who were grabbing at these vegetables were grabbing at their favorite candy bar. And the joy that was felt by this one family is just so disproportionate. You would have thought that someone had given them the best gift ever. And that just really goes to underscore the level of hunger, of desperation, of struggle that is happening there. And it is quite simply illogical and absurd that the best solution that the world can come up with right now is airdrops and a few dozen trucks, when we're talking about needing hundreds of trucks every single day to begin to reverse the impact that this prolonged hunger and starvation crisis has had on the vast majority of Gaza's 2.1 million residents.
I wanted to get your response to the Israeli ambassador to the U.S. in an interview on CNN with Wolf Blitzer yesterday. His name is Yechiel Leider. He claimed Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is flooding food into Gaza.
We feel the same way. The Prime Minister feels the same way, and that's why he's taken every decision possible to have food flood into Gaza. As a matter of fact, right now as we speak, there's 636 trucks, semi-trailers, waiting to enter Gaza, and the UN agencies are not picking them up because of their argument with the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. I appeal to the international community, to the media. I mean, look, there have been pictures that have been broadcast, even on CNN, I gotta say this, excuse me, but even on CNN, pictures of children who are suffering from cerebral palsy or cystic fibrosis, not from hunger. And yet we're condemned for it. This has a long history. of pointing the finger at the Jewish state. It really has to stop.
So that's the Israeli ambassador to the U.S., Yechiel Leiter. Arwa Damon, can you respond?
Yeah, and I'll respond on a couple of points that he made. First of all, on the issue of, UN agencies refusing to pick up the trucks. This is not the case. And let me just explain what the process is to actually pick up your cargo once it has been cleared by Israel. And I'll quote a colleague of mine who quite simply put it as, it's not as if you're going to a McDonald's drive-through. When we want to go and pick up humanitarian aid that has been cleared by Israel, we first have to put in what's known as a movement request. So Israel has to approve our movement, because to go and pick up that aid, we have to go through the red zone. This is not a quick process. Add to that, on the day that you want to actually move, you have to again wait for Israel to give you the green light. You then move to a holding point where you again wait for the green light, and then you're able to move and get whatever it is that you're able to load up onto these trucks. Now, recently over the weekend, for example, there were 15 movement requests that were put through. Half of them were flat out denied. Others were impeded, and only a handful of those 15 movement requests were actually able to go forward. So humanitarian organizations want to go and pick up the aid. We need Israel to facilitate that process and to ensure that that aid is able to be safely picked up. On the issue of the images of, starving children and this claim that they all have underlying chronic or congenital conditions. On the one hand, look, when we're talking about something like hunger and starvation, we're talking right now at this stage about weeks and weeks and weeks where the population of Gaza has gone through very low intake of nutrients and a very low intake of calories. This will first and foremost impact children under the age of 5 whose bodies are still growing, who need those energy stores to be able to keep going. And this results in what is known among children as wasting. So their bodies are quite literally eating themselves up because they don't have enough energy store. And when it comes to children who have underlying chronic and or congenital conditions, yes, they are among the first to also be highly susceptible to dying from malnutrition and starvation because their bodies are already weakened. And so to say, oh, look, this child has cerebral palsy and that's why they died, that is very misleading. Not to mention that a child with cerebral palsy, if they do have access to proper nutrients, proper food, proper medical care, they can actually live to be anywhere between 30 to 70 years old. But I will also point out that it's not the first time that we're hearing Israeli officials deny what we're seeing with our very own eyes. We have also heard this from Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu himself, saying there's no starvation in Gaza. We can see what's happening. We talk to our colleagues every single day. My own staff message me saying, quite simply, Arwa, I'm hungry. And so we're at a point right now where, it really feels as if Israel wants us or is trying to convince us that what we're seeing, what we're hearing from the population of Gaza, what we're hearing from Palestinian journalists, what we're hearing from humanitarians and other medical staff on the ground, be they Palestinians or those who are going in on any number of missions, that they're all somehow not seeing what they're actually seeing, and we're not somehow seeing what is playing out on our screens every single day. It's ridiculous.
And you as a former CNN journalist, they can let the journalists in. There are Palestinian journalists, many have been killed, but they do not allow in international journalists.
No, they don't. And actually there was, I think it was yesterday or the day before, BBC and Sky News were taken on an airdrop that was carried out by Jordan. As the BBC was reporting, they were very specifically told not to film out the window. And this call for international journalists to be allowed access to Gaza has been ongoing since the beginning of all of this. And that's not to take away anything from the extraordinary work that Palestinian journalists themselves have been doing. But the sad reality is that if the international media, the outside media, wants to be able to push back against these frankly ludicrous Israeli claims, they do need to be allowed to go into Gaza and see it with their own eyes. And I have consistently said, and I said this from the first day I set foot in Gaza over a year ago, that if anyone goes into Gaza, within 15 minutes, the vast majority of what Israel is claiming just unravels before your very eyes. And there is a reason why Israel doesn't want to allow journalists into Gaza. And it's not what Israel continuously claims, which are concerns over the journalists' safety, because they didn't even allow journalists, outside journalists, into Gaza during the ceasefire. And it does end up begging the question of, what are you so worried about? What are you afraid that these foreign journalists are going to actually uncover, that you're continuing to deny them entry?
Oh, I wanted to turn to a video recorded by your team in Gaza.
Our team went to visit this family. The mother had showed up hysterical and desperate to our clinic. The twins were born in January. They're both running a fever. I mean, just look at the rashes. They have diarrhea, but there aren't enough Pampers. There's not enough water to wash. There's not enough anything. Look at what's left of the baby milk powder. It's barely a couple of scoops. But there isn't any available on the market or anywhere else because Israel has restricted the entry of baby milk powder. The kids are hungry. They haven't showered in ages. Mom shows us how she had to chop off one of her daughter's hair. It was so lice-filled that her scalp was bleeding. Our Inara team is able to provide them with whatever meager supplies that we still have. And one of the boys tells Yusra, our program coordinator, that it's his birthday the next day. And his mother says he asked her for bread on his birthday. Not a cake, just bread. And then do you know what happens? Yusra returns on her own time with this, a bread birthday cake. Because this is the sort of kindness and gentleness and generosity that defines Gaza and how its people look out for each other, whichever way they can.
It's Arwa Damon narrating the piece in Gaza. We last spoke to you, Arwa, just after you got out of Gaza last time in November. Are you allowed back in?
No, I'm not. I attempted to go back in, and I applied to go back in 5 times in February and March and was finally denied entry with no specific reason that was given. And it's worth noting, though, that the increase in denials of entry to those who are trying to go either on humanitarian missions or on medical missions has increased by 40%, and no one is really ever given a reason why. It's just feels really like another way to sort of continue to suffocate the efforts of humanitarian organizations on the ground. It's absolutely tragic. And I just want to point out, in that clip, because listening to it, especially that ending part, really does make me smile. And I do wish that everyone could, just think that as they're listening to the news, as they're listening to the numbers, so many of those people whose faces they're seeing, they carry the same level of kindness and tenderness that our staff, people like Yusra, do as well.
Arwa Damon, thanks so much for being with us, founder of Inara, nonprofit currently providing medical and mental health care to children in Gaza. We'll link to your piece for the Atlantic Council, Inside the Israeli Government's Starvation of Gaza, from an aid group trying to deliver food. Thanks for watching Democracy Now! On YouTube. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to make sure you never miss a video. And for more of our audience-supported journalism, go to democracynow.org, where you can download our news app, sign up for our newsletter, subscribe to the daily podcast, and so much more.
I mean, I can't even believe that the world has not intervened.
That you see that? That you see that? What more do you have to see?
Hey, here's a feel-good story. Guess what? This is from July 21st. Israel bombed a kindergarten in Gaza City.
Finally.
So I can't watch it.
I can't either.
Yeah, I don't want to see that either.
So Israel bombed a kindergarten in Gaza yesterday, then waited for they did a double tap. Do you know what that is?
Yeah.
So you bomb someone, and then you wait for the rescue workers to come, and then you bomb the rescue workers.
Gosh, Jimmy, I'd hate to see what the most immoral army in the world does.
Can you imagine bombing kindergartners?
Well, I'm not the most moral army in the world, so of course not. I'm not the most moral army, so how could I even envision something? I'm not as moral as the IDF that does that, so no, I cannot.
So,
oh, I love Israel so much, I just want to squeeze them. Hey, why wouldn't they do that if they traffic your kids through Epstein? Why wouldn't they do that? They've done all kinds of things to kids.
I mean, you see those kids? There's this little kids, 5-year-old kids.
Yeah, but they're my genetic enemy, and I'm an Ashkenazi. So, get them all out. Hey, why doesn't Egypt take the kids in if I'm not supposed to kill them outright? Why doesn't Egypt take them, or Jordan? Just because I stole their country, why doesn't Jordan take them?
So what is a double tap? So this is the definition from Grok. It refers to a tactic where a drone conducts an initial missile or bomb strike on a target, followed by a second strike shortly afterwards. The second strike often targets first responders, such as medics or civilians, who rush to the scene to assist the wounded from the initial attack. This practice aims to maximize casualties or disrupt rescue efforts, but it is highly controversial and widely criticized. It has been accused of violating international humanitarian law, as it may intentionally target non-combatants or medical personnel, which is prohibited under the Geneva Convention. The term that has been notably associated with U.S. drone operations in regions like Pakistan, Yemen, Somalia, as reported by human rights organizations and media outlets.
Oh, I just want to drink Obama in like Stephen Colbert when I hear that.
So how you could still support... I mean, I couldn't even watch 10 seconds of that video. That little kid with blood on his face.
Is it wrong?
Is it wrong? Is it wrong? Is it wrong? Haska Mania wedding party. So the Haska Mania wedding party airstrike was an attack by the United States forces on July 6, 2008, in which 47 Afghans were killed. The targeted group was escorting a bride to a wedding ceremony in the group's village. This is in Afghanistan. The United States government denied that civilians were killed in the incident. An investigation by the Afghan government disagreed and determined 47 civilians, including the bride, were killed.
And the whistleblower was sent to prison.
Here, this is from Wikipedia. This is the summary of the events. On July 6, 2008, many Afghan civilians were walking in an area called Kamala in Haska Mania district of the eastern province of Nangarhar. When the group stopped for a rest, it was hit in succession by 3 bombs from the United States military aircraft. The first bomb hit a group of children who were walking ahead of the main procession, killing all of them instantly. A few minutes later, the aircraft returned and dropped a second bomb in the center of the group, killing many women. The bride and the 2 girls survived the second bomb, but were killed by a third bomb while trying to escape from the area. Haj Khan, one of the 4 elderly men who were escorting the party, stated that his grandson was killed and that there were body parts everywhere. So that's what war is. That's what that's what we're over there bringing freedom and democracy. We're protecting women's... Remember they said we're protecting women's rights in Afghanistan? And so,
women are
of
banned
course,
from going to exploding classes.
So Israel is no different than the United States in that regard.
Yeah. Yeah, don't blame it all on Israel. America's the devil too.
Yes. So that's I mean, I can't even believe that the world has not intervened.
That you see that? What more do you have to see?
Well, we have weather weapons, Jimmy, so what are they going to do about it? Nothing. And they have better propaganda than North Korea could ever afford or dream of. So what are you going to do about it? Nothing. People aren't even going to acknowledge just basic truth. They're going to live in fantasy land. You don't have to kill nobody. You could just stop being a chump, but they're not going to do that because your career. And they're squeezing everybody now economically. So what are you going to make waves? No, you're going to keep your head down and do your job, which is what my friends say when I hammer them with this shit relentlessly. I'm quite notorious for it. But I'll keep going until you go, I just want to keep my head down and do my job. I got like 4 people to say it. Just say it and I'll leave you alone. Just say it. Tell me you're a cow and I'll just leave you alone.
So they say, I just want to keep my head down and do my job. They say that stuff?
Exact words I'm quoting from at least 4 people. Because they come back at you, but they don't know shit. And I, unfortunately, know shit, which I hate.
Yeah.
And so I'll just keep coming and coming and coming until they break down.
Yeah, that's what
leave 'em alone when
that's
they
what happened to me with
punk.
that's what happened to me with Hillary Clinton. I knew all about Hillary Clinton. My friends in Hollywood who were supporting her, they don't know anything about her. Just like Kamala Harris, they have no idea she locked up black women and mothers of kids and black people, and the federal government had to sue her to get her to release overcrowded prisons, even after the judge had told her to do it twice. And they don't know anything.
Let me quote Kyle Kinane to you last time I saw him. Well, I know Kyle Kinane. I like him. He goes, "You know too much stuff." That's a quote. He meant that. Yeah, I agree. I agree, Kyle. I know too much stuff. And now you have to, because I do. Kyle, that was not fair what I did to him, but his friends were cool as shit. And it was good for him to have to hear this shit. So I don't regret it. I'm helped by my friend Kyle Kinane. What's the problem?
Yeah, I haven't. I really haven't. I haven't seen any of those people in such a long time.
People are still going to Netflix as a joke auditions. These losers, like
what is that? What is a Netflix as a joke?
It's the latest thing for dumb whores to go to and suck up and tolerate being sexually assaulted. It's the same. Like they're all lining up to get in the dragon's mouth, no matter what happens in Hollywood. Hey, we don't get the Epstein files, but the good news is Diddy's coming home. A lot of people are aspiring to go to his parties. Forever.
So you mean their festival? Netflix is a joke. People are auditioning for that festival.
It's just like a new comic thing. I can't tell you how many.
It's like so they don't do the Montreal Festival anymore. They do that, and that's like they have their new faces or something.
I mean, I don't think it's literally that, but it is kind of, like, because Jeff L's like whatever, so that's probably the new thing if you're new. When you were coming up, they probably still had Aspen Comedy Festival, right?
Yeah, I went to that's where I met Joe Rogan.
Yeah, so that ended by the time I got to Montreal. The getting the holding deal stuff had ended, although Kevin Hart got one when he went, but because the guy Chicken famously humped his stool.
Yeah, and
they stopped just giving money. Like
so it was after that.
Ukraine.
So they threw all that money at Chicken. And that
they used to fund sitcoms like it was Ukraine, but they had better sense than the people that funded Ukraine.
It was such a scandal that they stopped giving out development deals after that.
How about you just fire that person that gave him that development deal and everybody that greenlit that guy humping a stool?
He ended up
Chicken committed slip and slide because comics hated him. They blamed him. They didn't blame the scumbag industry. They blamed this poor hack that ended up taking his own life because it got to him.
Did it?
Yeah, that's how that ended up. Why are you mad at the guy humping the stool? You're not mad at your agent and the industry? No, I want to have a relationship with power. Mm-hmm. Like the great Crystal Ball once said.
Come see us in Oxnard, California, Rutherford, New Jersey, Manhattan, New York, Edmonton, Calgary, Vancouver, Appleton, Wisconsin, Rosemont, and Chicago, Illinois. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for tickets.
This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Mimi Goodman with Nermeen Sheikh.
As we continue our coverage of Gaza, a Palestinian medical organization reports Israeli forces are increasingly abducting doctors across Gaza, with some 28 doctors currently held in Israeli prisons. Among them is Dr. Marwan Al-Hams, head of Abu Yusuf al-Najjar Hospital. He was last seen 10 days ago when an Israeli undercover unit seized him at a field hospital of the International Committee of the Red Cross in Rafah.
Well, our next guest is a U.S.-based surgeon just back from Gaza, where she treated patients at Nasser Hospital in Khan Yunis, where she says malnutrition cases are everywhere, in newborn babies, pregnant women, even among the hospital staff. Dr. Ambreen Slimi is a urogynecologist who's the executive director of the International Medical Response Foundation, based here in New York City. Has provided medical services in numerous countries, including Pakistan, Nigeria, and Ukraine. She's joining us here in New York. Thanks so much, Doctor, for joining us. You are just back this week from Gaza. Talk about what you found on the ground and the evidence that the Prime Minister of Israel is denying that there is starvation in Gaza.
Good morning. Thank you for having me here in New York. I just got back 2 days ago. And I spent about 3.5 weeks there, and primarily in the maternity hospital on the grounds of Nasser Hospital. And It was evident to me in my firsthand experience that what I was seeing was malnourishment in my patients, which were pregnant patients, but also those needing gynecologic care. And it was evident by the numbers of babies and their birth weight that was coming out, that they were being born to malnourished women. It was evident in the decreased ability to breastfeed when the newborns were born by the moms. And also in the way that pregnancies had complications that had increased in number, and remarkably so in the last few months of the siege. So there was ample evidence, just clinically by numbers in cases of complications, by birth weights of babies, by preterm babies, and also just being able to look at our patients, to see bones that normally we wouldn't see. And we also saw it in our hospital staff, because not only were those being taken care of in a hospital starving with lack of access to good nutritious food on a regular basis, but also the caregivers were also feeling the same lack of food, feeling the same hunger pains. And it was openly discussed, because everybody would sit and talk about how hungry they were in the break room, and when they were leaving, that they had to go now and find food for their families. So, I think it was very clear in my experience and those I was working with that this was really a starvation crisis that was occurring.
And Dr. Salimi, you spent most of your time there in operating rooms. If you could talk about the intersection, the pregnant women that you dealt with who were also suffering from traumatic injuries, what were the principal things that you were treating and the surgeries you were performing?
I'm really glad you asked that, because I think when we talk about pregnancy in a war zone, we really need to address the issue of trauma in pregnant patients. And actually, just before coming here, I found out that one of our pregnant patients who was in the ICU had passed away yesterday. And she was 5 months pregnant and sleeping in a tent, and a bomb was dropped in the area that's supposed to be a safe zone. So she ended up coming in with, extensive burns and explosive injuries with shrapnel, and required major surgery for the burns with skin grafts, major surgery, abdominal surgery to get rid of the shrapnel. She had lost vision in one eye, and she was intubated. She couldn't breathe on her own because of inhalation from the smoke and fire. So there was a thought that she would be able to pull through. Oh, and by the way, she was also 5 months pregnant, which was really hard to even notice because she was so malnourished. So I was consulted to come in and at least do an ultrasound and make sure that the baby was alive, and before I left, it was. And so I just found out yesterday, as I was checking up on her, I found out this morning that she had passed away. And there's always hope that somebody will pull through. But the situations with the sanitation in Nasser Hospital, we also just heard as we were leaving on Monday morning that the clinical wound services for over 400 patients had to be suspended because the supplies had run out. So we're already dealing with, malnutrition and starvation because of the Israeli siege on food and supplies, affecting healing on a heavily traumatized patient population, including pregnant women. And now the services that were going to be withheld were the one thing that could get them to some healing with appropriate wound care.
I wanted to play for you the Israeli ambassador to the U.S., Yechiel Leiter, who claimed that the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was flooding food into Gaza. As we know, Netanyahu has denied outright that there's starvation in Gaza. This is the Israeli ambassador.
We feel the same way. The Prime Minister feels the same way, and that's why he's taken every decision possible to have food flood into Gaza. As a matter of fact, right now as we speak, there's 636 trucks, semi-trailers, waiting to enter Gaza, and the UN agencies are not picking them up because of their argument with the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. I appeal to the international community, to the media. I mean, look, there have been pictures that have been broadcast, even on CNN, I gotta say this, excuse me, but even on CNN, pictures of children who are suffering from cerebral palsy or cystic fibrosis, not from hunger. And yet we're condemned for it. This has a long history of pointing the finger at the Jewish state and really has to stop.
So that was the Israeli ambassador speaking earlier. So, the reference is to a New York Times cover story which showed the image of a child who appeared, in fact, was starving. But the Israelis said the story was misleading because the child actually had cerebral palsy. Now, Dr. Salimi, if you could explain, that argument, respond to what was said now, but also the fact that that child had cerebral palsy. But first of all, cerebral palsy patients don't necessarily look so enormously emaciated, and the claims that Israel is making about what's actually going on in Gaza.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point that the government, on one hand, is saying one thing, and then in our experience, what we've seen firsthand as clinicians on the ground are seeing something completely different, that there is widespread starvation caused by the siege. We see it every day. We see it in our patients. And in children, not just with other conditions, but including cerebral palsy, they shouldn't be starving to death. So we have other children who don't have any other conditions who are also clearly starving from lack of nutritional food, and adults. And like I said, the caretakers that are supposed to be taking care of those who come in for care. I mean, how is this possible that they also are not getting nutritional food and starving and hungry?
And just to be clear, I mean, if you're suffering starvation and you get food, that doesn't mean you're going to be okay for the rest of your life. Can you talk about the effect of starvation on children, on adults?
Sure. Based on what I know, again, it's not my area of expertise, but we know that many adults and children right now are in a stage 5 of the famine and starvation, and reintroducing food to a body that's been starved for months has to be done very carefully, and it can actually lead to somebody dying if it's not done appropriately, because you have lack of not just food. I mean, you can eat bread every day, but that's not enough to sustain development, healthy, brain development, body development. And I think that's the thing that you'll see even in kids now after being deprived for months. The siege that's happening in the last few months is an acute event on top of a chronic, already malnourished population. So it's, insults to injury. And again, these long-term effects of, developmental delay for kids. We see that. We know that's a possibility. How is it going to affect the adults long-term when they do eventually get a steady supply of food? And I think that we know that there's going to be chronic health conditions.
You've also worked in Ukraine. We just have 30 seconds, but the comparisons.
I mean, they're both tragic situations. But one thing I'll say is I have worked in both, and as a humanitarian physician, feel that it's important that we work where we can, where the populations need it. But the one thing I can say for Gaza that is different is that there's no safe place in Gaza. We hear it all the time. Being there, it was completely evident that there is no safe place in Gaza.
Dr. Umbreen Salimi, urogynecologist, executive director of the International Medical Response Foundation, just back this week from volunteering for several weeks at Nasser Hospital in Khan Yunis in Gaza. Thanks for watching Democracy Now! On YouTube. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to make sure you never miss a video. And for more of our audience-supported journalism, go to democracynow.org, where you can download our news app, sign up for our newsletter, subscribe to the daily podcast, and so much more.
If the ranger's stupid enough to get close to me, I'll pick up and toss him to the ground so hard his back will break.